So the Jordan 1 Take 5 almost looks like a combination of a casual shoe mixed with a Nike SB concept, but underneath it packs a pretty big punch. Let's get into it. The uppers of the 1 Take 5, they're something else. If you look at the lace line here, the tongue specifically, you get these capsules of foam that are pretty bulbous. They go from the distal end of the lace line up to about 3/4 of the way through the lace line. The problem is they don't go as high as where the ankle meets the rear foot or the midfoot of the shoe. And so when you tie the laces down, especially if you use any of the runner's knot holes, you actually do get some options here. You get a really far proximal on the lateral side hole over here to do a quasi runner's knot or get a little more locked on the lateral side. Then you get a traditional runner's knot here on the medial side. The problem is if you use any of those eyelets, this will start to dig in. I mean, once you break the shoe in, and these do have a pretty interesting break-in profile, it does get a lot better. You can pad under there, but that is something to look out for. The rest of the uppers, though, are all really reinforced very nicely. Now, the lace line is all reinforced. Then you get this TPU around the lateral side of the uppers. I kind of wish they would have done that medially. I mean, if you look at the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, yes, that synthetic leather or suede or whatever it is, it does resist the burr decently well, but it would have been nice to have that TPU wrap around the medial side as well, because it's going to start looking a little weird, especially on outdoor courts. The rest of it's pretty cool. It's really thick material going all the way in to the rear foot that reinforces this whole upper. The problem with all of that is, if you look at the breathability test, these things heated up 151.8 degrees, and more than it's heating, if you look at the breathability mapping, there was just no airflow anywhere on these. I mean, not even through the cracks in the tongue, because there is a really aggressive gusset on the tongue, and then it is reinforced over top of that. So these shoes are not going to be breathable whatsoever. Now, you do get a ton of lockdown, really no heel slippage at all with these, even when I was really trying, and they do feel ultra secure on your foot. And these uppers are very low volume. They have a very intimate contact with the dorsal part of your foot, right? You really feel sucked down into these shoes. There is just not a lot of room for airflow. So what you do get in containment and feeling of security, you pay for on the other end with breathability. I'd say the most bizarre part of the 1 Take 5 is its midsole. Not that it's bad, it's bizarre. Now, it is an entire bed of Phylon, and a very dense Phylon at that. Really reminds me of the Vapor Pro 2 and Vapor 11 from Nike Court. Just a really responsive Phylon, but also, like I said, very dense. It does have a bottom-loaded shank, which is really broad in the midfoot, and then it's got a 4-foot zoom air unit. Now, from the bottom of the shoe, it would look like it's a really small zoom air unit. However, you cut it open, it's actually a pretty big one when you look at it from, you know, the top of the strobel board, right? It's a pretty big zoom air unit, and then it's got these plastic pieces underneath of it, almost like the plastic on the bottom end of the Nike GT Cut 3, just maybe a little bit stiffer. It's a really weird setup. The interesting thing is, if you look at the balance height test on this, you get 32.5 centimeters in the heel, then you get 47 in the forefoot on this zoom air unit. Typically, these metatarsal parabola shaped zoom air units don't get as much bounce as some others, but I think it's that piece of plastic underneath of it maybe gives it a little bit more pop underneath of the shoe. So really not a bad profile on the shoe, especially because it is so wide in the forefoot in terms of the flange. I mean, this flange is super wide, comes up over the midsole, it cases the midsole on the lateral side, and that flange is so thick with rubber. So it is a little bit of a stiffer setup shoe, but it still has a lot of pop to it. Shank score comes in only at 0.1 because the shank is more of a containing element, not so much a diving board effect element in there. But for what this shoe is and the profile of it, it's really bizarre how well this shoe kind of gives you something back. And so, you know, speaking of what you can see on the outside of the shoe in that outsole-based flange, this is a very wide set herringbone outsole tread. You've got a little bit of a softer rubber here and this translucent rubber here in the forefoot. Then it is cased here in the forefoot, the tip of the forefoot and the rear foot by an offset herringbone, a little bit harder rubber, right? But the thing is that that tread goes so far lateral, it goes so wide in the shoe. It doesn't mimic the inside of the shoe, I'll tell you that when we get to the fit section, but in terms of feelings of stability and grip on the ground, I mean, on the grip test ramp, they slipped at 39 degrees, which is just kind of middle of the road, middle of the pack. But the thing is, because of the profile of them, because they are so wide set, they are just so incredibly stable on foot. To me, the tread felt more like the tracks on a skid steer or a bulldozer than anything else. It was just a really rugged type grip on the ground. Yeah, it picked up dust, and it did kind of have a little bit more forgiveness on the court versus some stickier rubbers, but because they are so stable, I still felt a ton of confidence in these. I mean, if you look at the outsole durability test on these two 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, yeah, I mean, about a millimeter of damage on both rubbers, even though the durometer on the rear foot's a little bit higher, the burr still did get through it a little bit. So I would say on an outdoor court, I mean, they're protective enough for an outdoor court, I'll tell you that, and the grip is rugged enough for an outdoor court. It is gonna start wearing down on the forefoot though. However, on an indoor rubberized carpet or hardwood court, these should last a decent amount of time as well as give you a lot of stability. The only square on these that I can't circle though is the speed ratio. They come in at a 2.65, which is pretty high for a shoe with this type of profile. Once it breaks in, because of the phylon in the midsole, that dense phylon, if it does have a decent shank on it, will break in pretty nicely. And I think the forefoot, you know, that rubber is going to break in at some point. These still are not the easiest shoes to get up and down the court on, right? They require significant amounts of break-in for them to feel any bit buttery. These are much more of a rugged shoe. But in terms of the feeling of bounce, the feeling of launch in them, they're not bad. Like I said, you just have to break them in first. Once that happens, to me, they're not the fastest shoes on the planet, but they will be able to get out of a jam quickly in kind of tight situations or in a crowded situation. I think you can get a pretty quick step back on these, you know, just kind of create space pretty quickly. In terms of north to south speed though, yeah, they're definitely not the best out there. But looking at the fit, if you look at these from the top down, especially with, you know, the flange kind of giving you an optical illusion, you would think these are really forgiving shoes. The width only comes in at an 8.9. These are pretty unforgiving shoes in terms of width, especially because you have TPU on top of rubber. There's just a lot of reinforcement here in the forefoot, so it's pretty unforgiving. I'd say a narrow and medium foot, you can go true to size at 2E. I'd definitely be going up 1/2 size on these. You know, and they're not the longest shoes either, plus they're lower volume. So anything a little bit of width, a little bit of length, you're gonna wanna be going up 1/2 size on these. The problem is because of where the flange sits and how the shoe is, if you start going up too many sizes on this, you're gonna start to lose the best parts of the shoe, which is that really intimate one-to-one feel on this shoe because of the lower volume. This shoe is best for a narrow or medium foot though, for sure. Now, somebody with heel pain, arch pain, I think it's okay with an orthotic in there. Arch pain, I think the shank is pretty good. This does not allow a lot of rotation there, so especially straining type injuries, perineal tendonitis, posterior tibial tendonitis, these are gonna be pretty good for, like I said, because they are just so darn stable. Ankle sprainers, these are fantastic for because they are so stable. In terms of the ball of the foot, because it's so low volume, like bunions, Taylor's bunions, forget it. If you have any bit of a wide foot, it's gonna be terrible for ball of foot pain, even though there is a forgiving Zoom Air unit in there, and it is pretty wide of a Zoom Air unit, it's just gonna be crunching down on you. So the narrow and medium foot ball of foot pain is fine. It's just, you gotta be the right shaped foot, the right width, foot, and size to be able to enjoy the comfort of this shoe, because it is meant to be comfortable for a certain foot, just maybe not some others. And the playability of the One Take 5 to me goes right back to the speed ratio. I think these things are tremendous in and around the hoop, creating space, really just anything that requires really aggressive grip. If you play a very aggressive game, right? Especially if you're trying to trample over people, right? If you're trying to bust through a lane, then they're not gonna be the fastest shoes to the hoop, but they are gonna be one of the more stable ones. If you're trampling over people's feet, and you know, you've seen all those images of people, really small steps you can take on someone's foot and just, you know, twist your ankle. These are gonna be one of the better shoes to that, because they are just so stable in the forefoot, and they do resist bending, especially they resist torsion so much in the midfoot. So a super stable shoe for, to me, more of a ground assault, or if you're trying to be very creative around the hoop and you're not really sure how you're gonna come down on the ground, these are one of the better shoes for those crash landings, especially if you're coming down on your forefoot. So it's an esoteric shoe, and I think it does a lot of things really well. It just does require a lot of break-in to get the comfort aspect of the shoe to come to you, as well as to get the north to south movement on the shoe. If you're playing half court, right, then these are fantastic, right? So, hey, as long as you're the right player for these, I think you can extract a lot of tools out of these. And I think these are gonna be some of the sneakier shoes this year that come through that a lot of people really like and a lot of people stock up on. And just, like I said, you've gotta be the right foot shape for it to extract the tools of them. So, love to hear your thoughts on the One Take 5s. These were a surprising shoe to me when I got them out of the box. I'm looking at them, I'm thinking like, what are these gonna do? And they really did surprise me in a lot of different ways. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you wanna see another one of the brand new models coming out from Jordan Brand right now, the Jordan 38 logo under the knife, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.